What's the most disturbing book you've read that isn't horror? Story 1, The Hot Zone. A terrifying true story was an absolutely wild read. It's about the origins of the Ebola virus in the 80s/90s. It reads like a plague horror novel, but is a true story. Commented elsewhere, but I got COVID while traveling and reading Hot Zone. Obviously, nothing like the descriptions in the book, but man, I needed a beat. Intense reading. In addition to being scary, The Hot Zone has some of the most amazing prose I've ever read in a nonfiction book. It personifies the virus, discussing it with reverence and fear. I won't share any of the more morbid descriptions of infection, but here are three different passages, not sure how to separate them out. Some of the predators that feed on humans have lived on the earth for a long time, far longer than the human race, and their origins go back, it seems, almost to the formation of the planet. When a human being is fed upon and consumed by one of them, especially in Africa, the event is telescoped against horizons of space and time and takes on a feeling of immense antiquity. Ebola, the great slate wiper, did things to people that you did not want to think about. The organism was too frightening to handle, even for those who were comfortable and adept in spacesuits. They did not care to do research on Ebola because they did not want Ebola to do research on them. Isn't it true that if you stare into the eyes of a cobra, the fear has another side to it? The fear is lessened as you begin to see the essence of the beauty. Looking at Ebola under an electron microscope is like looking at a gorgeously wrought ice castle. The thing is so cold, so totally pure. Story 2, Tenders the Flesh. What would happen if cannibalism became normalized? You can find out. I didn't really understand where the book was going until the very last line, which changed the whole reading experience, and I loved it. It's also a very, very thinly veiled allusion to our cattle raising and meat eating practices. And the author isn't wrong. What we do to them is pretty awful. Just read it. Ending actually infuriated me. Completely unexpected because it did not match how Marcos was developed throughout the whole story. I thought this too, but Reddit reviews of this book in literature subreddits actually explain it very well. The clues of his character were laid out from the very beginning. I realized that painting Marcos in that light was kind of cool, and he was no better than the others. His distaste for the practice, empathy toward the head, and all that was just a part of his holier-than-thou persona in a moment of extreme grieving. He was grieving, coping the entire time. Story 3, Kindred, by Octavia Butler. It could be seen as a horror book if it weren't for the fact that the horrific elements of it are historic, set in 19th century southern U.S. slavery. Not being American, I have no real connection to this period, but it brought it very close nonetheless. And it was an odd mixture of thinking I'd need to read more of Octavia Butler and not wanting to because it was so unpleasant. That book did make me curious to read actual slave narratives. So far, I've only actually read Frederick Douglass's autobiography, but still. It's even worse knowing that the stuff you're reading actually happened, like literally the exact specific acts being described. Not just things like it, but those things specifically, with those people specifically. Story 4, A Child Called It. My mother made me read this at 10 because she wanted to let me know the abuse she gave me wasn't that bad. I ended up bonding with this book and series because I felt like it was the only thing or person I could relate to. There was an expose about the author a while back, and it seems like quite a few claims could not be substantiated. I read all 3 parts back in high school. In one part, he talks about his mom stabbing him in the side and then nursing him back to health. However, when interviewed, he said the stabbing did not produce any scars. Seems like his childhood was very rough, but he might have exaggerated some aspects. He used to do a lot of community outreach work in his area, speeches and advocacy work, but after the expose, he just quietly went away. Every time this book is posted, I and other people talk about this, and then a dozen people fight like hell to defend him, and I never understand it. Child abuse is real. Real children go through exactly what he went through, and worse. I think he was probably abused, but it also definitely seems like he embellished it. It didn't help that one brother says it definitely never happened, and the other brother says, yes, it did, and then it happened to me once he left to read about it in my book. Story 5, American Psycho. People might argue that it's horror, but I think it needs to be scary to qualify. This book is just disturbing. I read it as a challenge because my friend told me how messed up it is. Reading about graphic violence isn't the same as seeing it, so I can stomach it, I thought. Nope. Had to put the book down several times and take a breather because it was so stomach-churning. It's the only book I've read where I had to stop and just go, wow, what the hell? Though I did laugh at the part where he covers a used urinal cake in chocolate and has a waiter serve it to his unknowing girlfriend on her birthday. Pretty messed up. People forget that when you're imagining something terrible like that, you're imagining the literal worst possible version of it that you can think of. The camera can't obscure the thing you don't want to see. The director can't go overboard and make it silly. The actor can't put in a bad performance that sinks the dramatic crap of it all. Then when it's over, it's your imagery that you have to live with, not someone else's that you just remember. Story 6. The Grapes of Wrath messed me up even worse, the second reading, and won't ever read another book like it. I was homeschooled grade 4, 8, and my mom would have me get at least one classic literature book per 4 my books when we went to the library. I hated 90% of them, but I'm glad now I had that exposure. Except she didn't really take into account that just because my reading level was very high, my comprehension wasn't necessarily there. So when I was like 10, she made me get Grapes of Wrath and happened to mention it to my HSH cousin who was horrified. "You're having her read what?" And I mind you, I still hated it when I read it for 12th grade. But that was because screw Steinbeck's writing style. Story 7, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. For those who have not read it, it contained lightly fictionalized descriptions of Chicago meatpacking plants that directly caused the passage of the U.S. Pure Food and Drug Act and the establishment of federal food inspection standards and agencies. They had to, because meat consumption fell in half after it was published. And that wasn't even the goal of the book. It was written as socialist propaganda. People forget that part. Story 8, Bright Shiny Morning by James Frey. It's an anthology-style book telling the story of several people in L.A., from a homeless guy to a runaway couple trying to make it in the city, all the way up to a famous couple trying to hide their secrets. I need to reread it, not gonna lie, but the book really shows the dark side of the City of Angels and had me messed up for a hot minute after. Great read, but leaves you with a similar feeling to something like Grave of the Fireflies, just a damn, people are screwed, this book was messed up. Why do stuff like this happen sort of vibe? Story 9, The Indifferent Stars Above. It's nonfiction about the Donner Party. I read a lot of horror fiction, but this is one of the scariest books I have read. Before I read it, I assumed that pop culture had dramatized the Donner Party, like it tends to do with historical events. But the actual events were way worse than I thought. Story 10, Guts by Chuck Palahniuk, a collection of short stories that will change you. The pool one haunts me. Yeah, I had to restart the book because that story was so messed up, and I had read all of Chuck's books at that point, including the travelogue about Portland that I highly recommend. I knew that he was dark. I didn't know that he was that dark. And that was before all the viral stories of people passing out and readings happened. I did go to a reading and somebody did pass out, but who knows if that was a plant. Still, I think that Haunted, while gross, isn't as messed up as the willing annihilation of self that the protagonist of Survivor went through. Story 11, On the Beach. It's just a bunch of people waiting for a massive cloud of radiation from the fallout from the nuclear holocaust that ends civilization. Some people live life. Other people hold out hope that it will get better. My mom's grandfather took her to see the movie when she was 3. 3! She was terrified by sunsets for months after. I read it when I was around 12. I read a bunch of novels right around my preteens. I read First Blood and Alien. I thought Alien was the novelization of Aliens and was confused at first. I read First Blood thinking it was going to be a Rambo book, so I was confused again. I also read The Ship Killer, Zombie House, and Tengu. On the Beach was the one that really made me think about mortality and what it's like just waiting to die. Story 12, 1 Second After, and the 2 sequels. Written by Dr. William Forstchen. They are set in towns near to where I live. They are about the aftermath of an EMP. Terrifying. There was an excellent TV show on that subject. Revolution, but not the Blue Blood one on Netflix. It's located in current time and starts with a guy, you assume he works for Govt, calling his family and saying, "It will go out and never be back up again." And a few seconds later, everything electric, including stored electricity, goes out. Phones, cars, lights, everything. And the story then starts 15 years later and turns around finding the very few persons that knew the why and how. Story 13. The day after I finished reading this, my power went out inexplicably, and I was petrified that fiction was coming true, and had to call people from different parts of the town and state to reassure me that they still had power. Right after I finished that book, we had an island-wide blackout in Puerto Rico, while my wife and I were in charge of my buddies and 2 kids for a week. I freaked the hell out, haha. I remember going to the store and the gallons of water were untouched. Everyone was grabbing beer and liquor. I planned on leaving some for other people, but people were talking smack, and I was like, y'all have no idea how bad this could get. They originally said the repairs could take months, but they got it back up within the week, I believe. Pretty scary, though. Story 14, Under the Banner of Heaven, a book about the Mormon Church and its origins. Super disturbing. John Krakauer has an eminently readable style. I didn't read this book for many years because I thought it would shake my faith. Turns out my faith got shaken anyway. Truly excellent book. I remember those events from newspapers and the TV news when I was a teen. Story 15, Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. The whole pearl diving story. Yeah, Palahniuk really knows how to be effective at squeaking out his readers. He kind of sneaks up on you with it, and then by the time you realize what you're reading, it's too late. I don't like it, but I respect the hell out of his craft. Story 16, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. Case studies of people whose brains, at least in part, stopped working right. Most didn't realize it, but the people around them certainly did. Oliver Sacks' work was brilliant. If you haven't watched it, the documentary Alive Inside about using music for Alzheimer's is beautiful and very thought-provoking. Story 17, Lucas, 4 Years of Hell and Back. It's a German book that is an account of a real experience of a 15-year-old who becomes part of a Satanist sect. At one point, he bites the head of an alive hamster and swallows it for a ritual. I read it when I was alone at home at 12 years old at night, and I still can't forget it. I don't know why that book was in our house, and I deeply regret reading the whole thing. I hate that it's supposed to be real. Story 18, Taboo, or whatever's the name in other languages, and here's in Italian. And I Won't Surrender, first one, about the rugby team that crashed over the Andes Mountains while returning home. Loved it, but I would never read it again. The second one about the Japanese soldier that wouldn't believe World War II ended and kept fighting for years, believing every way they contacted him was just the enemy trying to get him out of cover. Story 19, The White Plague, 1982, by Frank Herbert, author of Dune. A biologist's wife and kids are killed in Ireland in a terrorist car bombing. He loses his mind and develops a virus that kills only women and releases it in Ireland and in Libya, where the IRA terrorists were trained. He demanded that these two countries have their borders closed, and the disease runs its course through these two countries. The virus escapes and spreads worldwide. The disturbing part is that it's over 40 years old and could happen today, anytime. Story 20, The True Story of Hansel and Gretel. It was about the Holocaust, but it was historical fiction, not horror. There was this one disturbing paragraph early on in the book. After I read it, I put down the book and just stared at my bed for 15 minutes. Story 21, Metro 2033. The video games do great, but the books have some real disturbing scenes. I remember getting completely immersed when I was reading the first book in high school, to the point people were talking to me, and I didn't even realize it until someone actually snapped or clapped me back into reality. Some scenes about being in the dark in the tunnels were so descriptive, I was physically getting choked up and feeling anxiety. I will forever enjoy that book with every read. Story 22, The Devil of Nanking, Mo Hader. This book, I read the entire thing once, have tried to read it again quite a few times, got to a certain part of the book and cannot go any further. My daughter, who had read the book before, went to Tokyo for a week in 2019 and took this book with her to read at night in the hotel. My God, I almost couldn't believe it. But our family is weird. Well, I have every Mo Hader book, most first edition hardbacks. Picked up Birdman in paperback at a thrift store, and that was the start of my Mo Hader addiction. Damn, that woman could write. Story 23, The Berserker Series, 1963 and onward, by Fred Saberhagen. Science fiction. Two planets are at war with each other, and each develop AI war machines to eliminate their enemies. The machines become self-aware, ally between themselves, and eliminate both planets. They then become self-replicating and venture into the galaxy with the goal of exterminating all biological life forms. The series is incredibly prophetic, considering that computers were simplistic when the series was written. Now we're seeing leaps and bounds in the complexity of AI, to the point where synthetic voices and AI artwork is difficult to distinguish from human voices in art. In the last couple of years, we've seen AI chatbots advising humans. Life has been on Earth for billions of years. It's taken humanity hundreds of thousands of years to develop. Digital entities are evolving at an incredible pace. Will they flip to Skynet from the Terminator and decide to kill us all? How will we defend ourselves from them? Story 24, a book about coming of age. It's about a boy who is starting to go through hormonal changes and finds himself peeping on girls behind a tree while he masturbates. His mom is rather abusive and makes fun of him, especially when he has accidents in his pants. The book, if I remember right, depicts him as somewhat mentally challenged, but I really can't remember the name of it. My mom made me read it when I was 12 or 13, basically her way of teaching me about the birds as bees without actually teaching. It's sort of stuck with me all these years, I'm 40, and kind of resent her for making me read it. If I remember the name of the book, I'll update it here. Story 25. Two manga, Yamikan Ushijimakun and Chino Wadachi. The first is about a loan shark working in Tokyo, and all the people who end up owing money not just to him, but to other loan sharks as well. It gets incredibly bleak. Everyone seems absolutely miserable. One story that really got to me was a girl who was trying to save a retirement fund by working in a massage parlor, and to make the most money, she was taking on the worst clients, the ones that got obsessive and creepy with her, so she had to move to different shops to get away. That had me staring at the wall for a bit after. The second is about a boy whose mother is obsessively protective of him, and after an incident with his cousin, they both start losing their grip on reality. The artwork makes things extra sinister. Even if you're not a manga-ish reader, I would recommend them. Oh, and for regular fiction, The People in the Trees was absolutely messed up. Same author as A Little Life. I found it more disturbing than that book. Story 26. Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. His other novel, Blood Meridian, is a common answer, and for good reason. But while it has more violence, I don't find it as unsettling and uncomfortable as Child of God. Perhaps it's the perverseness of Child of God, or perhaps it's the very close, intimate perspective into the violence, as opposed to the more eagle-eyed perspective on the violence in Blood Meridian. Story 27. The red herb, picked at random from the school library, should definitely not have been there. Now banned in many countries, I must really say, I do not recommend reading this. A world where sadism, abuse, and slavery are commonly accepted. The way it's written, you don't even know the world where the story is taking place is any different than the real world. And then it just nonchalantly moves on to the main character abusing and torturing, just for fun, in a place made for that, because people get bored, and it's just normal things to do. I felt violated for reading it. Story 28, Bloodtide, Melvin Burgess. Fantastic book, but when I read it at like 13 years old, it was a bit disturbing how some of the stuff played out. The 13-year-old main female of the book grew up in captivity of her arranged marriage husband, who killed all but one of her family. Her twin brother escaped. As an older teenager, she forces her shape-shifting witch cat to trade bodies with her so she can get her brother to knock her up. Then, she gets scientists to clone the baby and make the original weak and pathetic, and the clone superhuman, super growth rate, with no emotions and nothing but loyalty for the brother. And it just gets weirder. Story 29, Ordinary Men by Christopher R. Browning. It's about how ordinary men, they weren't soldiers, just middle-aged men, because that's all that was available, just followed orders when they were asked to hunt and kill Jews, including making pregnant mothers strip naked, walk them to a mass grave, shoot the kid, ease, and then shoot the pregnant mother, point blank. They were given the opportunity to not participate, no threat of being killed or hurt, but would be shunned by their group, so they chose to go along with it. Helps explain why everyone went crazy during the COVID thing. People just need to want to be accepted by their group, and they will do anything to stay in it. The modern governments around the world know this and follow the playbook perfectly. Should be required reading for anyone who works in a position of power. Police, army, security, corrections, teachers. Actually, it should be required reading for everyone if we want to ensure it doesn't happen again. Makes you realize everyone is capable of doing evil if the circumstances are just right. Story 30. Probably Naked Lunch. It's got everything. The government either tried to ban the book or did, but the publishers won on appeal. No matter how you slice it, there was a legal battle over letting people even buy the thing. These are not my concepts, but the concepts of a famous book by a famous writer. And you asked the question, so here goes. Caveat Inquisitor. To give you some idea, it starts out in the earlier stages humorously, in a mental hospital where an evil psychiatrist is describing how he's got a subject of lobotomy, 1950s psych drug brainwashing / behavioral conditioning, to come prepared and report willingly for SA by the psychiatrist at a certain signal, like a trained monkey. Later on, there's a capital punishment wild party, with aliens who secrete addictive seeds swinging off the backs of the capital punishment victims in the very act of committing a misdeed mid-execution, not to mention page upon page of 1950s heroin addiction, oozing sores and pus, suppurating under the granulomatous venereal lesions of the various intercourse fiends depicted in the book. It was made into a Hollywood movie, and that even got name-checked by The Simpsons. It's pretty out there.